So, hello everyone. My name is Vicki Gibbs, and I am one of the program directors here for the Foundit program. And Foundit is brought to you by the Duke Christensen Family Center for Innovation out of the Pratt Engineering School over at Duke. And the big purpose for Foundit is to really make tech startups more diverse, more accessible, and more inclusive. And as a part of that, we are bringing the foundations of innovation and the foundations of technology to people like y'all. And what we really want to do is make sure that everyone understands these technologies, not just the techie side of it, but how can you apply new technologies to solve the problems in the world today? So we're excited to have you all here today. And I'm really excited to welcome two experts in our topic today, which is blockchain. So first we have Nick Miliones, who founded a very early blockchain crypto company, which he will tell us more about. And also Sophia Lopez, who is co-founder of Kaleido, which is a blockchain startup in Raleigh, North Carolina. So we'll be hearing from her later in a fireside chat as we dig into applications. First of all, we are going to start off with a little workshop session, and Nick is going to really help demystify blockchain for us so that we can really understand what it's all about and how to apply it to today's problems. So without further ado, Nick, I'm going to hand it over to you to take it away.
Thanks so much. Great to meet you all. My name is Nick Miliones. So first, just setting the stage a little bit here. Our goal is going to be to introduce some core concepts within blockchain. Ultimately, we want to have some fun and really prime the conversation for when we welcome Sophia for our Q&A. And so ultimately, we're going to just really try to establish a nice foundation around the world of blockchain. Quick intro to my background. So I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Navi. Navi is the gateway to the innovation economy. We build tools that help folks learn innovation skills, solve mission critical problems, and start companies. We do this by boot camps, accelerators, and of course, our technology. And so we're going to introduce a little bit of that over the course of this workshop and upon concluding today's session. My background is also, I've been in the crypto space for some time. Back in 2013, my co-founders and I started a company called Bitwall. We're going to get into that story momentarily too. And so big picture, we got into the crypto space in the early days. And for many of you, either crypto fanatics or those of you who are just joining in, we've been on this wild ride with you and been enjoying it quite a bit. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to jump into the meat of our conversation around this workshop. As we get started, there's one special request I want to make from everybody. So those who have your camera on or those who have your camera off, that's just fine too. One thing we love to do just to build our momentum is do a team round of jazz hands. And so a jazz hand is putting your hands up like this and just getting a good jazz shaking. And so just shout out for everybody if you could. Let's do just a round of jazz hands just so we all know who's here. All right, fantastic. Much appreciated. Always helps us build some nice momentum heading into a workshop. So with that, welcome to Blockchain Firestarters. The ultimate topic that we're going to focus on is hair on fire problems that blockchain may be able to solve. The key thing that we want to call out here is ultimately our goal during this session is the following. We want to introduce some of the core pillars that go into this blockchain ecosystem. Part of this is going to talk about the technology. Part of this is going to talk about the ethos that attracts many folks into this world of blockchain. Ultimately, we want to be able to just establish some foundational pillars for you all to build upon. And then the second piece of this is we want to use this as a chance to spark a foundation for you to pursue potential blockchain ideas. And it could be, of course, you take an idea and turning it into a business. It could be you just investigating this world of blockchain further through research, or ultimately building your skills further in order to get to a point where you can start being quote unquote dangerous in this world of blockchain. So our goal is really to establish this foundation and ultimately spark some movement for you all. The key call out here is that this is not a technical deep dive. And so don't look to this as being the workshop that's going to go into the ins and outs on ultimately how to start writing code, for instance, and building specifically using blockchain technology. It's more about establishing that foundational layer. And the first part of this workshop absolutely is going to be giving us this foundation. And then we're going to have a great conversation with Sophia and get into more into her world and how she's been able to really drive significant value with their blockchain platform. So one thing that we love to talk about ultimately is the variety of ways that you may have heard about blockchain over the years, whether you've been in it since the early days or you're just getting started today. Ultimately, folks have talked about blockchain as being a panacea of sorts and ultimately being a catalyst for a lot of opportunity. In doing so, we've heard some incredibly powerful descriptions of blockchain. At the same time, they can be quite challenging and ultimately can't always be as instructive as it relates to knowing how to get started in blockchain. These are a few of our favorite descriptions that ultimately inform us around blockchain. And the key thing here is that in reading these, it's still really difficult to know where to go and what to do when it comes to this world of blockchain. So just calling out two of them. One is a blockchain is an incorruptible ledger of digital records. Awesome description. I love this. Probably doesn't give you enough to know where to go forward in terms of your next step. Another tremendous description around blockchain and then the ethos behind it is that blockchain may be a force for economic freedom. It's amazing. It's aspirational. There's so much that can be built using this technology and so much that can potentially be achieved. That being said, as you all have been out in the wild learning about blockchain, you might have seen these descriptions introducing blockchain. And the key thing that we recognize is that while so powerful, they don't necessarily get into the simple way to understand this world of blockchain. And so our goal, as Vicky's mentioned, is to demystify some of these core pillars of blockchain and be able to get into some of the simplicity that comes into the foundation of this world of blockchain. So we love looking at it in the following way. Think about blockchain as a database that's run by different operators instead of a single entity. And so there's a couple of key things that I'm going to want to call out on this slide. And so ultimately, a database often is a collection of information. It's a collection of transactions. It's a collection of records, so to speak. Database houses information. One of the core innovations around blockchain is that ultimately they made it possible where instead of having to trust a single entity to manage that database, so to manage the historical records of that information, instead, you could then put trust, so to speak, or ultimately have this be facilitated by a group of more than one operators, different operators, operators that may not even know each other. And so this is an amazing innovation, and we're going to explain why that matters in just a moment. The big thing here is that if you look at a product like Amazon's AWS, they've got a variety of tools, including a database tool that allows you to have a complete collection of records and information. Amazon and AWS is the owner, and they are the entity that you are trusting to maintain that database. A blockchain operates differently, and this technology ultimately makes it possible where instead of putting your trust into this single entity, you are able to access this database tool that is run by more than one operator. And there are meaningful advantages that come from that. I will note that much of this, while we're describing this and we're saying there are advantages to this, there are advantages because there are specific problems that have faced humankind that we want to be able to overcome, especially in this digital era. And so in having a database that is managed by independent entities, it is now possible to potentially solve some of these amazing problems. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Big picture, the other key thing I want to call out here for a blockchain is that it is a digital sequence of blocks. And so as you can see for this visual representation, we've got 3 blocks, each leads into the next one. And ultimately, the best way to look at a block is that it is an entry, for instance, into this digital ledger of transactions. And in doing so, each one of these blocks includes information. Often this information is described as a list of transactions. So you would have a block, it would have a list of transactions. It might, for instance, show that Alex has some amount of Bitcoin, and then I've got some amount of Bitcoin. That might be in that list of transactions and that data. That block would have some information that is stored in that block. Then you've got a new block that gets added to this chain of blocks. And ultimately, it's got new transactions, new information, and it is giving you now the updated state of affairs for those digital records. And so a blockchain operates by being able to have this, incorruptible, or at least by design, incorruptible historical record of these transactions going from one block to the next. The key thing to note here is that, number one, it's an incredible technological feat to make this possible. And number two, there's this strong belief that if you've got a database that's owned by more than one entity, it can be able to solve meaningful problems. And ultimately, much of what we've seen in this world of crypto and the blockchain ecosystem are hypotheses being tested to see if this is actually solving a great problem and if it's delivering value to consumers in a meaningful way. The last thing I'll call out here is that in order for blockchains to operate the way that we've described, often you need a cryptocurrency. You need some token in order to facilitate, number one, adding a record to the blockchain, and then creating economic incentives to maintain said blockchain. Oh, and sounds like we've got our first question from the audience. Give me 1 second here. So Rocket she always disagrees with some of my takes around blockchain. So it's good to have a good critic. So big picture, there's this innovation that we've seen from blockchain, and it's making it possible to potentially solve some great problems. Now that everybody is sufficiently confused about why blockchain could be this massive innovation and why blockchain ultimately could be this huge technological leap forward, I want to spend a moment setting the stage in reality, so to speak. The reality of the world is that we are faced with a whole suite of hair on fire problems. And ultimately, there's this belief that blockchain technology and the innovations being built may possibly solve them. And so to set the stage a little bit further, I wanted to spend a moment introducing this concept of a hair on fire problem. Michael Seibel, startup founder, he was one of the co-founders of Twitch. They sold to Amazon for $1 billion. I think he's the president of Y Combinator. Big picture, he knows a thing or two about solving hair on fire problems. So I wanted to present this quote to help frame where we're heading next and why this all matters. He describes a scenario where somebody's friend's hair is on fire. And he explains that if your friend's hair was on fire, the only thing they would care about in this world is putting the fire out. And what that means is that the painful is really a problem, or the pain is really a problem, is really painful. And it means that if you were to give them a brick, so to speak, to put out that fire, it's a really bad solution, but the pain is so dire that they might be willing to use it to put out that fire. And so much of this innovation journey is all about finding hair on fire problems and then building potential solutions to see if you can put out that fire, so to speak. Blockchain technology is one that is ultimately a potential catalyst for solving an unbelievable amount of hair on fire problems. First, a fun example to explain what kind of hair on fire problems we're talking about. Just to do a quick survey for folks and show it by way of jazz hands or some digital jazz hands. Have any of you all seen the movie Wreck-It Ralph? Any Wreck-It Ralph fans out here? All right, sweet, nice. Wreck-It Ralph's one of my all-time favorites for sure. And it was only more recently when I realized that we might have a blockchain hair on fire problem on our hands in Wreck-It Ralph. The conflict is the following. The protagonists end up in this world called Sugar Rush. It's a car racing game. And what happens is that this is going to be a spoiler for folks, so my apologies. There is ultimately a queen or a princess that rules this world of Sugar Rush. Turns out she's lost her memory, she's lost her place among the other racers, and she needs to fight to earn her way back into this world of racing. The issue and the reason why she's lost her memory and her place as being the one that's the presiding authority over this world is that there's a centralized database where you've got the villain, in this case, Turbo here. The villain goes into the centralized database and corrupts it. You've got assets in terms of the items that people own within this database. You've got the racer's memory. You've got ultimately the rules that govern this virtual world. Turbo goes into this virtual world and puts a lockbox around the racer's memory, ultimately takes Vanellope's position as the person that is the ruler of this world and tries to boot her, turning into a glitch in this world. And then as a result, he has seized control over this kingdom. And he's done so in a tremendous movie, but ultimately he's done so in a way where you've got this centralized database where he was able to go in and corrupt it. And so you had one point of failure that made it possible for this entity to be able to seize ownership of this world, seize the assets, and ultimately create a scenario that was quite dire for the protagonists on this journey. Of course, ultimately, the protagonists overcome this dilemma and are able to right the wrongs that were done. But the key thing to note here is that in a scenario where you've got a centralized database, it's possible for a central authority to ultimately act in a way that's not trusted and not in your best interest. And when that happens, they can seize control over your assets. They can ultimately create a scenario that is undesired by you and others in the community. Wreck-It Ralph is an awesome example of this. And there are plenty of others in the world of fantasy, fiction, and increasingly getting closer into this world of nonfiction as well, where we're seeing these scenarios where there exists a virtual world or some digital assets that are owned, and there's a central authority that tries to seize these assets and ultimately creates pandemonium for those that are operating in there. Ready Player One and Snow Crash are two more examples of virtual worlds that ultimately underscore why these ultimately centralized ownership of assets can be a risk. I'm going to pause there, and we're going to now slide into, now that we've talked about some more fantasy examples. And of course, I bring up these virtual worlds because they're fun. They can help paint a great picture, but much and more economic activity are happening in these virtual worlds where the scenario I just described is very real. Now we're going to make this transition into a world of even more real, so to speak. Let's rewind back to 8 years ago. So as I mentioned, my co-founders and I started a company called Bitwall. Bitwall made it possible for content creators to monetize by selling their content for Bitcoin and other forms of alternate currencies. There was a few interesting things going on in the world that we observed. One, there was a hair on fire problem. When it came to newspapers, magazines, and other media creators, they hadn't done a great job at adapting online. They missed, quote unquote, Web 1.0, for instance. They ultimately had a tough time with this transition to the world of social, so Web 2.0. And then when Web3 was peeking its head into the world, namely when we were starting this idea back in 2013, we were anticipating a proliferation of cryptocurrencies. It was our belief that we could possibly help digital creators be able to monetize by helping them accept Bitcoin and other alternate forms of currencies. So the hair on fire problem we set out to solve was that they don't have an economic system that makes it possible for them to really sustain creating article content. We introduced a Bitcoin paywall. We had some fantastic outcomes. We started back in 2013. We really got our big launch and our big break with the Chicago Sun-Times in 2014. Fast forward to 2018, we sold Bitwall. And so we sold that in the earlier part of 2018. And since then, we've really had a great chance to be able to continue to support innovators on this innovation journey and be able to be at the pulse of interesting things happening in this world of crypto and blockchain. And of course, most importantly, we spent a lot of time looking at other hair on fire problems that could be interesting for innovators trying to solve meaningful opportunities in this world. To jump into some examples, first, I'm going to highlight some hair on fire problems that have been at the foundation of some cryptocurrencies and successful companies that you've seen in the world of crypto. And then we're going to talk about other hair on fire problems that might be instructive in order to help us understand why a decentralized database, for instance, can be this meaningful catalyst of opportunity for folks. First, let's talk about the innovation behind Bitcoin. When we were looking at when Bitcoin first came into the world, one of the main problems, and really the hair on fire problem that the creators of Bitcoin wanted to solve, was that commerce on the internet became dependent on financial institutions that you had to look at as a trusted third party. And so what that means is if you wanted to send money or some form of a digital asset from one party to another, you needed to absolutely rely on a centralized third party to say, yes, Nick is sending that Bitcoin to Alex. They recognize the transaction and facilitate it. We needed to put our faith into this centralized third party. And so, for example, you could take PayPal or a bank as being an example here. You're putting your faith into some centralized third party and ultimately saying, I'm going to trust that you're going to do this and that the information that you're sharing with me is accurate. And so the creators of Bitcoin said, we're going to design a system that means you no longer need to trust this centralized third party. And instead, it is going to operate in a way, and as I mentioned, where the facilitators and the managers of this database are distributed and you're no longer reliant on one single entity as that potential point of failure. So that was the foundational hair on fire problem that the creators of Bitcoin wanted to solve. Ethereum pursued the world and viewed the world similarly when it comes to hair on fire problems. What they said was that electronic transactions can be reversed without you giving approval for it. And one of the most fun things about this, for those of you who know the world of Ethereum and know the core creators for Ethereum, Vitalik had the initial inspiration and is the core creator for the Ethereum blockchain. And so Vitalik was playing and I can't remember which game it was. It was either a mobile game or a computer game where you were accumulating virtual assets in this game. I think it was a sword that he had ultimately received as part of his participation in this game. He received some digital sword. And then what happened was, and this, I'm not going to quote the story perfectly, but as I understand it, the sword had this incredible powers. The central authority, in this case, the game developers and creators, just decided that the sword was going to have significantly reduced powers and ability. And so he had really spent a lot of time, effort, and investment into participating in this game, achieved this huge milestone, got this digital asset. And then in doing so, the sword lost its value. And it was something that was completely outside of his control, outside of the community's control. One single entity made the decision and said, the sword no longer has its full value. And so that was the initial spark that said, if you're going to be accumulating assets and creating value and needing to have complete ownership of the value you create in this digital world, you want to make sure that that you're not reliant on a centralized authority that could seize your value. Thus was born Ethereum, and so much additional value, of course, as many of us know, has been built on top of the Ethereum blockchain. A few other fun ones in terms of inspiration for hair on fire problems. One is that we talk about accountability, trust, and ultimately making processes more observable. And so one of the things that people look at for blockchain is that when you've got this database that's distributed across more than one entity of ownership, part of this, especially if it's a public blockchain, which is great, is that ultimately you can actually see the transactions that have happened on there. And so if anybody knows OpenSea and has purchased an NFT or is interested in investigating what visibility into a blockchain looks like, you can go to OpenSea or a similar tool, look at an NFT, and then you can go into the complete historical records of ownership for that NFT. This level of transparency in terms of ownership is unprecedented when it comes to what you could afford with other versions of a database. So in short, you can make ownership clearer, and you can be able to drive different levels of accountability and trust by way of having a public ledger that shows ownership. And then another great one I want to share here before we hit you with a more rapid fire example of some things around blockchain is the following. Brian Armstrong, co-founder and CEO of Coinbase, when he was describing the motivation for building Coinbase, he posed the following question. He was saying, if the world had more economic freedom, would we all be better off? And so the hair on fire problem that was particularly interesting and has been something that has motivated so many folks in this world of crypto and the broader blockchain ecosystem is this pursuit of economic freedom. Ultimately, much of the world suffers from not having great economic freedom. When folks are building wealth and building assets, you run the risk of having those assets seized. You run the risk of having those assets lose value. And so part of the motivation and excitement around these crypto economies is that there's a chance that cryptocurrencies and the platforms and tools built on top of this world of blockchain may be a catalyst of economic freedom for the world. I think we're all in agreement that a world with more economic freedom will be a fantastic outcome. The last thing I'll note about the way I'm phrasing some of these things is that these are hypotheses. The folks that are participating in the world of blockchain have a belief that you can solve these problems in meaningful ways, and they're working night and day in order to figure out if they're on the right track and if they are designing tools and systems that are solving these problems meaningfully. The big picture takeaway is that a database that is owned by more than one entity and is done so in a way that can be able to show, that can have public accountability of transactions, so to speak, may be a catalyst that can solve so many types of problems. All right, let's go with a couple rapid fire ones here. And I want to make sure we've got time to invite Sophia onto the stage, because big picture, as I mentioned, all of this is just to prime the initial conversation around what blockchain is and hair on fire problems that it may be able to solve. We're going to get into some more specifics and really put Sophia on the hot seat to learn about her world and how they're making this all possible today. So here are a few things to consider if you all are looking at continuing your investigation around the world of blockchain, namely potential hair on fire problems that blockchain may be able to solve. To call out a few, one, as we all know, when you are operating, when you've got your health record within a health system, health systems are fragmented. So if you are transitioning from one hospital to another, one of those entities owns your data. They own your health record. And so the process can be incredibly cumbersome and can be riddled with challenges when it comes to transitioning your information from one system to the next, even though it's your health record. And so that's one really popular avenue that folks are investigating around blockchain as being a potential catalyst to solve problems. The last one I'll mention here is fragmentation of in-game currencies. This one's so interesting, and it goes back to the conversation with Vitalik and others around virtual worlds. If you are creating wealth and accumulating assets in a game or another type of virtual world, number one, there's a risk that a central authority will seize those assets or devalue them. And then number two, what you often can't do is take the value you've accumulated in one of those virtual worlds and take it to another. And so if you're playing some mobile game and you've got a sword that you've unlocked with just tremendous efforts in that game, you can't take that sword elsewhere very often. And so blockchain technology and the innovators that are working in the space are making it possible where when you've earned that sword, it's yours. And what that means is that you can then have the opportunity to potentially take it with you to other virtual worlds, so to speak, and be able to reap the rewards of the value you've created. Last final call outs are some other real world examples that we've seen for innovators delivering value and solving real world problems. It's really difficult to move money across the world. Ripple is a perfect example of a platform that is helping with money transfer. So money transfer has been a hair on fire problem that continues to plague the world. This is a great one where blockchain technology is a catalyst to help solve that problem. And then, of course, one that many of us have seen that has really caught the world on fire in the last few years is this NFT ecosystem. People, collectibles, and things that fit into that world have been popular for humankind for the longest time. When it comes to ownership of a digital asset, prior to blockchain technology, it was very difficult to be able to have proof that you own a scarce digital asset. An NFT makes this possible. NFTs unlock this world of digital collectibles and make it possible for really anybody to be able to own a scarce digital asset in the form of a collectible. NFTs also don't mean that it has to relate to collectibles, but the thing that has really caught fire that many of us may be familiar with is this acceleration of opportunities around the world of digital collectibles. And Dapper Labs is one of those that has really helped bring NFTs to the forefront of the conversation around blockchain technology. I'm going to pause there because I want to make sure that we jump into some great conversations with Sophia. I've got a few more slides, but these are going to be saved for really some outro thoughts. Before we welcome Sophia on, does anybody have any questions about some of the things that we introduced? As I mentioned, the goal here is just to plant the foundation and build some momentum around what blockchain is and some of the hair on fire problems that innovators and creators are working on solving today, ultimately giving you all some wind at your sails to move forward in this blockchain world. With that, though, I'll pause. Does anybody have a question or a jazz hand they want to fire off? Any of the above is open. We got some good jazz hands. Fantastic.
Hey, Nick, I got a question here. I don't really have any background in crypto, but so essentially the accountability of the currency, because it's multiple. Essentially, the way it is, it's a single and it's instead of a single entity, it's multiple operators, multiple independent entities. So, is the value per se held accountable by each other people? Like, do people hold each other accountable for the value? Is that how the accountability would work per se?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, and also I'll hold on some of this too, because I think that'll plant the seed for a good question with Sophia in a moment as well. So the key thing is that when it comes to the value, it operates like a free market where you don't have, it's not that folks are agreeing on the value of the asset, so to speak. It's market determined. So there are exchanges and other platforms that one can use to buy and sell the cryptocurrency. And so then these market platforms help match supply and demand in order to facilitate the transaction of those crypto assets and ultimately facilitate determining the value, so to speak, for it. And so that would be the value side of it. Is if there's pieces I'm missing for your question there too, we can hold that one and we can welcome Sophia on in a moment, and then we can use that to build our momentum for the first part of that conversation too.
No, that makes sense.
Cool, perfect. Vicky, how are we doing on time? Should we welcome Sophia on and get started?
Yep, I would say let's transition to the fireside chat, and I'll let you kick off with an intro and have her introduce herself, then we can jump in.
All right, let's do it. Well, Sophia, thanks so much for joining us. We're so excited here. As we've all mentioned, the objective for this journey is to establish this great foundation and really welcome folks that have made the magic happen in this crypto economy, this world of blockchain, so to speak. And so Sophia has been one of the pioneering innovators when it comes to making blockchain technology usable and making it possible to solve some of these hair on fire problems facing the world. And so what we'll do is we'll turn it to Sophia first. If you could introduce yourself, and then I've got a sequence of questions. We'll open up for others to ask questions too, and then we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Vicky, for inviting me. So little background. So Sophia Lopez, I'm one of the co-founders of Kaleido, which is a Web3 technology platform. We work very closely with the leading enterprises in the space. So we're very focused on real applications of the technology, driving, helping put a big easy button on adopting these technologies so that these large enterprises and large networks of enterprises can get to production and get meaningful value, business return on these, their investments with the technology. Prior to starting Kaleido 5 years ago, I actually was executive ownership of the IBM blockchain platform and launched the world's first blockchain as a service while at IBM and grew that business. So, in the process of working with those early innovators, really saw some of the enterprise needs and that they needed a lot more than just a blockchain node. They needed a full stack of technologies. So left to start Kaleido and got seed funding from one of the co-founders of Ethereum. But from day one, we're always committed to flexibility and choice. So we're all about running, managing, operating best of breed open source for Web3 technologies. And that's obviously, going to be evolving and changing over time, but we provide a number of blockchain protocols and then associated sort of decentralized technologies as well, sort of like Lego building blocks that enterprises across all industries can use. And it's like a basic platform. Today, a lot of times when they're running some of their core systems, they basically pour concrete into the foundation of their business with these hundreds of millions of dollars implementations of these large software packages. So now, of course, they need to move a lot faster. They need to move to the cloud and digitally transform, which is why the blockchain technology really matters, because they're also looking to work as an ecosystem and adopt some of these new technologies, for example, around tokenization, digital twins, moving from physical to digital.
It's fantastic. Well, I think the general theme here is that in the world of blockchain, Sophia can make it happen. And the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. Yeah. Definitely good to have you here. So Sophia, why don't we do this? First thing I wanted to ask you is, why does blockchain technology matter? What would what do you think is the foundation of that?
Sure. I mean, from our client set, which are enterprises, we also we work with native Web3 startups as well, but let's say companies that really want to implement a real solution or product versus, let's say, in crypto, which is one use case for the technology, it can be more of a speculative ecosystem that's built. So we're not working in the crypto space of like building new, tokens or launching tokens. We're working with companies who want to use the technology to drive other use cases. So what's happening, and to elaborate a little bit more about what I said as part of my intro, companies are looking at decades old infrastructure. They're doing a once in a generation shift, moving from like on premises to the cloud. They need to digitally transform how they're working. COVID really accelerated that by a decade. So, insurance companies couldn't have their brokers sitting in offices giving people pieces of paper to sign, as an example. And the same, if you look at healthcare and these other industries that traditionally move pretty slowly in adopting technology, overnight had to switch to working virtually and being able to digitally sign documents, digitally exchange data. And there already had been a trend going on for almost a decade now of businesses saying, we really need to move to more of an ecosystem economy approach. So the health of our business relationships is the network we're in, and that network of partners we work with. It's really that the products we can launch, the innovations we can bring to our collective customers that are going to differentiate us versus our acting as an independent actor. But unfortunately, enterprise IT, prior to blockchain and decentralized technologies, was really focused on your own company. And there was no multi-party type systems or mechanisms to get a shared view of data, a way to execute shared business logic for complex, like supply chain has so many different actors in it. And then you look at COVID, going back to COVID as an example, there wasn't enough toilet paper for everyone. No one knew where the toilet paper was. So, being able to track assets and have a lot more visibility and provenance. And I think, Nick, you had that as one of your examples of use cases. A lot of times there's disputes as part of just exchanging goods and value. So, how do you prove in hours, minutes versus, at IBM in the early days, we had a public use case we shared for blockchain. This was back in 2016. Just around internal supply chain with some of our suppliers, going from 40 days to manage a dispute, to just a matter of hours. I think all the money saved from that. So a lot of business benefits, and then just the ability of being able to move more towards tokenizing and tokenization. You can consider that almost like a killer app for blockchain. Not just with digital twins and the physical to digital, but just fractionalizing ownership, representing goods and services and different components in different ways. So,
yeah, it's fantastic. And you've already touched on a few of these pieces already, but just to go further on this one, what kinds of problems do you think blockchain can potentially solve for the world? And perhaps specifically, how are you seeing your ecosystem of customers use your tools to solve meaningful problems for them?
Yeah, well, I think your list on one of your slides, when you had the hair on fire problems, I know you started with some more you called it fantasy examples, and then some more actual examples. So fragmented health systems, is what we work across industries. So we have a network called Synaptics. It's a decentralized network. So every party is acting independently. They actually use a token in their system to reward people for contributing data. And then if you subscribe to the data, you have to pay for it. So it's data monetization. This is really solving the shared data problem in this particular use case for these large providers and healthcare payers in the US that include people like, Aetna is one of the founders, Humana's in there, United Healthcare, MultiPlan, a number of healthcare systems. And they basically, this is as basic as one of us needs to find a doctor, and we go to a provider data directory and the phone number's wrong, the doctor's not taking new patients, they're not in network anymore, the address is wrong. So the Center for Medicaid Services, reviews this data. They tell them every 90 days, you all need to call and these same doctors and update your records. They have call centers who do this. So it's expensive, duplicative work. And then 52% of the data is still wrong, even after all of that. And they get, there's fines and issues if they don't comply with refreshing the data every 90 days. And 75% of it's a complete overlap. And this is a $2 billion problem, just this one use case. So they all came together and said, it makes sense for us just to work together to solve this, and we can use blockchain to do that. So it's one example to the fragmented health systems. You could just start tackling like dozens of components of what that means. So it's like access to care is one component. Then you think about eligibility benefits, or, you know, just the consumer knowing how much it's actually going to cost for them to see that doctor. So there's a whole chain of services that are provided where you need to provide more visibility, drive down costs, provide better care. And this is something that's relevant to all of us, because we all need healthcare and our families and loved ones need healthcare. But from your list, like supply chain is a big one. Yeah, that cuts across all industries. So just whether you're tracking diamonds, you're tracking, you know, cosmetics, or you're tracking medications, you're tracking, you know, basically it could be any sort of good that's provided, you know, and then if you really break down what any company does, there's a value chain of moving something along the line. You're adding services, you're adding value to it, and then it's produced at the end. So this concept of using it for supply chain applies across all industries. Then you mentioned access to insurance and other risk reduction products. We're actually working with a 100-year-old institute in the US called the Institutes, and they have a consortium called Riskstream. So they actually have all like 70% of property and casualty, life and annuity and reinsurers in the US. And they have 24 use cases they've identified with working groups. So they've already launched a number of these. Like one is first notice of loss when there's a car accident. So you get this multi-party situation, you get into an accident, and it looks like it's modernized because there's mobile app, but behind the scenes, there's, you know, 26 different sort of manual steps while you're exchanging data and trying to confirm, you know, record what happened, get the viewpoints listed, and, you know, there could be some disputes as part of that. So modernizing the actual system and what's happening, and this helps provide, you know, better outcomes, faster resolution, lower costs. So a lot of times, you know, on the business side, it's better, faster, cheaper. So evolving current processes. And you could also have, that's more of an evolution of a process, business process. And you can have a revolution where now you're using tokenomics and token models to do something you couldn't do before, using the blockchain decentralization to offer a way of working together you weren't able to do before. So anyway, insurance is a big area. And then you mentioned, you know, gaming and game currency. So we're working with a number of gaming companies. And of course, the idea that you're creating value, you can represent as NFTs. They're working across games. The players want to own that value. So there's a lot of pushback by some player communities saying, you know, we don't want to make the gaming companies rich. But if you can take that sword, or, you know, you gave the sword example, to another ecosystem with you, and it really belongs to you, then I think that's a very different model for gamers. And now, you know, with the private and public hybrid approaches, so, you know, a Web 2 or Web 3 gaming company might say, we need to do like millions of transactions. We have a huge ecosystem. It's a popular game. We can't afford to pay gas on every single item that's in the gaming ecosystem. But there's going to be some high value things that are produced or earned. And those you might want to transfer and then take to an open marketplace and trade. So you need the ability to interact with the public ecosystem, but you also want to do, you know, very performance, scalable, and, you know, zero gas fee type NFT production on more of that side chain that the gaming ecosystem provides. So that's more of like a Web3 example of using the technology versus, you know, a big insurance company now using blockchain and tokens.
That's fantastic. Thanks for the deep dive in terms of how folks are succeeding on your platform. Let's look at this question from Vicky.
I just went down your list. I have a lot of other examples. To tie to what you had presented before.
Well, why don't we do this? Is there one other one that you want to share that could be a great example? Let's go there, and then we'll turn it. Vicky's got a question, and I can read the question that Vicky posed. So we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think I'll give two examples. One is that I wanted to say that this is, we've been in market for 5 years. So we have a network that's been running on us in production for 5 years. They're actually in the Philippines. They had 400 rural banks. And what they wanted to do from day one was to help with financial inclusion, because there's 36 million unbanked Filipinos. And there's a lot of islands. And so just moving money across the islands was very expensive. And then you have people who work abroad and send money back. So the costs, and they weren't on SWIFT, which is a global messaging backbone that banks can join, but these are, it's a different economy they have there. So the amount of money they were able to save if someone, let's say someone's working in the Middle East in, domestic capacity, they send the money back. That was equivalent, according to the chairman of the board of the bank who did the math for us, 1 to 2 weeks worth of food for their family. So it really makes a big difference. And that's coming on year 5 of being in production. I'd say one of our most recent financial services projects was actually with SWIFT itself. And they came to us beginning of the summer, and they had been doing some white papers and investigations on central bank digital currencies. And, Kaleido's a product platform. We have 500 APIs. It's like Lego building blocks, so you could quickly assemble solutions, and the easy button on adopting these technologies. They said, we want to go live with a central bank digital currency project where we can invite all the world's central banks and global transaction banks to onboard together and actually figure out together how they could work using central bank digital currencies around next gen use cases. So I'd say in the past, like 5 years ago or more, this would have been like a $40 million project and taken 6 or 7 years. But now with the next gen approach, which Kaleido has been leading, by the end of the summer, they were all, the platform was live and people were onboarding these large central banks and private banks who could all work together. And now they're in the middle of a 10-week sort of sprint where they're trying out lots of different financial services use cases in this sort of new central bank digital currency world. And they're going to produce a paper together and bring that forward. And it's the largest central bank digital currency project that I personally have been aware of to date. So it's pretty exciting. And I was in Amsterdam, they have a big conference called Sibos. So it was fun talking about that and just seeing the excitement in, face to face with all of these, bankers who are really looking at a much better way to be able to, transact in the world going forward.
That's amazing. It sounds like a great situation.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's sweet. All right, let's do this. So, Vicky, do you want to ask the question that you posed in here? Let's go into that, and then,
Okay.
Yeah, Vicky, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So one of the things that in all of your examples, you talk about how, there's these different connected systems that people have to engage in, right? Whether it's a supply chain of a single company, or like you were talking about a bunch of different banks getting together and agree. Is then one of the problems then, if you can solve the technology problem, which y'all seem to have done with Kaleido, how do you get all those companies to agree and be able to work together easily through it? Because that, to me, on the people side and business side, seems to be a challenge as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, Vicky. And the classic people, process, and technology. And there's a lot of research on organizational change. You need a burning platform to get people to change. Well, it's interesting in the Web3 space, you can actually have a couple of models. So there is one model where everyone's coming to the table as equals, and they might start a joint venture, and then they have to agree on a lot of stuff to get things off the ground. And we certainly work with companies like that. And having, a pay for what you use, easy to adopt technology platform really helps. And we have a lot of built-in governance as well. So that helps with scaling and onboarding new members, et cetera. But they still have the core sort of business and legal agreements they need to go through. A lot of them are existing business relationships, so they're just moving those to digitize and, to the cloud, transform those. So, but anytime you have people involved, more people could mean more complexity to getting to an agreement. We certainly see a lot of situations in Web3 where there's a solution provider who really understands the space, and they could put together a solution that now uses blockchain and digital assets as ingredients. So you have your ingredients, and then you're cooking the meal, and then you serve the meal. So, one good example of that was 4 years ago, before NFTs were a hot word that everyone knew what they meant. We worked with T-Mobile and Kroger. So T-Mobile has T-Mobile Tuesdays, and you get coupons sent to your phone if you're a T-Mobile subscriber. So people look for their coupons. And Kroger actually used NFTs behind every coupon. So there's global uniqueness, and there's a lot of issues with digital ad tech and fraud and duplication and the cost of their intermediaries in the coupon space. They were able to cut all of that out and say, we're going to go direct to the actual, shopper. And all they had to do was put their phone number in the phone and they'd get $3 off any $10 they spent. So they had 500,000 people access this coupon. And normally you have single digit marketing campaign rates. This one had like 65% campaign, engagement rate. So there's a lot of situations where you can have that solution. People don't even know blockchain is behind it. They don't need to agree to anything. They don't need to know like there's an NFT that's sort of, the powering, the discount or the savings. It's just, hey, I'm getting a better deal working in this, with this retailer, and I'm getting, in that case, they had a coupon, but in a B2B case, people are similarly looking for, if I'm a small, medium business and I need to send my goods abroad, now I'm able to do that with less friction or, lower costs of like transaction because people aren't assigning as much risk to me because blockchain is removing some of the risk. There are a lot of ways people can benefit, and not everyone necessarily even needs to be running a node or being validator in that solution. So usually there's the big dogs in a consortium, and then you have a long tail of the participants, and that ecosystem can grow where they have different levels of access to the underlying solution, and they could just be transacting. Could be somebody who's just, needs to work in terms of exchanging some documents, but they're not the core maintainers of that ecosystem. They're just one of a long tail of suppliers or intermediaries who need to get information on and off, or just read information off of the chain.
Gotcha. So a big piece of that I heard too, that was all consistent, was around creating less friction in the environment and having a very clear incentive for the person who's interacting with it. And that takes a lot of different forms, but people will also gravitate. It's kind of like gravity, and water always finds the lowest point, right? The thing that has the least amount of friction people will naturally gravitate towards that. So, okay, cool. Thanks for that. That was really interesting.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so let's do this. Sophia, for the sequence of questions we've got here, let's take a journey back, starting from really your introduction to this world of blockchain and ultimately founding Kaleido as well. And so first question here is, how did you start building your blockchain skills? Ultimately, what did you do to give yourself the opportunity to pursue such a venture?
Well, I was at IBM at the time, I guess in 2015. So just learning about the space. And at that time at IBM, we really launched the first open source community for enterprise blockchain that was under the Linux Foundation called Hyperledger. We donated the code base from our lab, which became Hyperledger Fabric. And then that's an umbrella of a lot of really interesting Web3 code bases now that enterprises could use. But, it's just a lot of learning, and in some cases, leading in the industry, learning from others, sharing what we're doing, always being very client focused. So in new and emerging spaces, you need to be someone who's really comfortable with ambiguity, who loves learning. And I think, in this particular community, there's a real ethos of sharing and getting there together. So I think that's one of the fun and unique aspects of working with blockchain and like the decentralized technologies that get involved here.
Yeah, that's golden. So looking at Kaleido then, how did you identify this opportunity? And more specifically, how would you define the specific hair on fire problem that you all solve?
Yeah, I think from the early days, and I briefly touched upon it, we realized running a node as a service is 5% of the problem that enterprises need to solve. And, you still see people, we're 7-8 years in, and just a major cloud vendor said, we're going to run a node as a service. And I'm thinking, wow, this sounds like 2015. But the hair and fire problem is there's just a lot of complexity adopting these technologies. If you think of all the different aspects of Web 2, and you're thinking about wallets, not just tokens, but the wallets and custody and identity and KYC AML if you're in financial services, but a whole list of things from a technology infrastructure, and then more at the app level that you need to reinvent for Web3. Smart contracts, smart contract management, just, building decentralized apps, and how do you get messages onto the blockchain? How do you get them off the blockchain? And a lot of people were starting in analytics and insights and monitoring. So all these point products are just solving pieces of the problem, but enterprises need, a stack of 10 or 20 of these to actually get something to market. So we're really solving like the 17 vendor problem by having it all in one, like one-stop shop that's plug and play. And this just means people can adopt things faster and get to market faster with their solutions. So Web3 is complex, but it doesn't need to be. We can just put the easy button on top of that.
That's so good. So thinking through this in terms of now, of course, we got the blockchain components we're talking about, but now thinking about your journey as an innovator, as a founder, a couple questions that relate to that. First is, how did you acquire your first customers? Ultimately, you're at the frontier of this new world and helping pave this opportunity. Number one, selling that opportunity to folks can be challenging. What did you do to acquire your first customers?
Yeah, so we were part of a venture studio called Consensus. That was their original model, was a venture studio model. So before we even launched on main stage in a New York conference called Consensus, confusingly has the same name, but it's run by CoinDesk. So we launched on main stage with AWS as a partner. AWS had done nothing in the blockchain space. So I think there were like 700 articles written, like AWS finally does something, and they partnered with Kaleido. So that was fun. And they had the general manager of the partner business unit on stage with us. But we also had the chairman of the board of this bank in the Philippines, I mentioned, and announcing this network, Project Eye to Eye. So that, because we were part of this venture studio and Consensus, had a footprint globally, that particular bank we did a soft launch before we did the public launch, where we onboarded some clients and they're already working with us, because it's great when you're on stage announcing to say, and we've got people already using us and live networks. But once we sort of flipped the switch, that was, we joined Consensus in 2017, and we launched on main stage about 5 months later with the fully fledged product, which was awesome with AWS. And we just moved really fast. As a startup, you need to do that in order to be successful. But what we did was, we had a software as a service, which was the first one in the industry for blockchain. So you could digitally discover us, you could try us for free. And today, that's still the case. We have a free starter tier. People have actually raised millions of dollars. I know one company raised $5 million on our free starter tier, because they could show their stakeholders and board members and their ecosystem, here's how blockchain could help. And you can, mint tokens on our platform, you can exchange them, you can model things, you have the analytics. So they had all the business relationships and they knew the problem they were solving, but they need to be able to show, like, we understand blockchain enough and we can show you how it's going to drive value. And they're able to do that with their starter tier, which is awesome. Then developers can just swipe with a credit card, move up to a development tier, and they can swipe and go up to business production tiers. And then enterprises want enterprise contracts, so they work with us with contracting. But basically having that digital demand generation funnel, and it's product-led growth. People have such a great experience. They really get it. I encourage you all to try it out, kaleido.io. Start your own tier, starter tier account. You could tell your friends, like, hey, I've got a blockchain network running. I just set it up, no big deal.
Oh,
you have a live network with tokens and everything. So it's really, just creating that product-led growth by having an awesome product for your customers.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. And obviously you mentioned part of that was getting that initial buy-in and then social proof, showing that trusted entities were live with your platform and were achieving success. It's a great way to go about it.
Yeah. And then, over the years, we saw that we're all about running and managing best of breed open source, but there was a layer that actually no open source project had tackled. So we ended up building that and open sourcing it and donating that to the Linux Foundation. And that's called Firefly. And that's their fastest growing project in the last 2 years in the blockchain space. And, big banks and companies like Swift and others, some of these developers come to us through the Firefly community, and that's how they find out about us. And then they're looking for enterprise support and who can run and manage and operate this. So that's where we can help them.
That's fantastic. Well, you mentioned a few of these details already, but I did want to ask this one as well. So ultimately, as you've continued to grow as a platform and a company, I wanted to know in the early days, what signals did you see that showed that the Kaleido platform was working? What did you see that showed that you were on the right track on this startup journey and really making it possible for others to start solving great problems?
Yeah, well, we announced on main stage in May of 2018, early May. And right after we got off stage, well, first, people are like taking photographs of the slides, which is always a good sign. You're showing them something useful. But they ran to our booth, and people like the CDC saying, "Hey, we have this like project we scoped for 6 to 9 months. I think I can do that in a fraction of the time now." And that was actually around tuberculosis disease surveillance. We had like the World Bank and IMF who came up to us. It's similar, people were just so captivated with, blockchain was pretty hard until today. Now it doesn't need to be hard. You could get started, and you've eliminated a lot of the complexity of just that proof of concept, going to pilot, going to production. It's all in the same infrastructure. You don't need to tear everything down and restart just to add a new member. Just some very basic things people were struggling with from the early days of just bringing, to Vicky's point, a group of people together and being able to scale those ecosystems and really grow to your full vision of what you're trying to offer your stakeholders.
You've got some very strong messaging too in the communication on this, because you mentioned the easy button. You mentioned ultimately blockchain was hard until today. It's obviously it's impactful for us tuning in, and it's clear that it's probably very thoughtfully crafted in terms of how you're going about this, because it feels right. It's great.
Thanks. I mean, a lot of times I, don't explain it in such simple terms, but I think it's helpful, just for like broader audiences sometimes to just boil it down to the basics, which is what it comes down to. So as technologists, it's easy to get really technical and just geek out on stuff, but it's not always like the right level of detail when you're talking about product market fit. What are the real benefits of doing something versus just, there could be sometimes where you have the hammer looking for a nail. People get so enamored with the technology that they sort of miss the mark of where it should be used, where it shouldn't be used, and then just how to do that in an efficient way where you get to market quickly. Sometimes people, it seems like they almost deliberately might want to take the long way around because they want to like prove a technical point out or something like that.
Right, absolutely. It's so true. That's definitely something that is at the core of our conversation today as well, where the more that we can make it possible where it's not the hammer in search of a nail, and instead if you're starting with the problem that you want to be able to solve, then that can give you a stronger pillar to be standing upon.
Yeah, I guess I've heard the expression, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So
yeah,
some scenarios like that, the different components of Web3 technology that people like identity, for example, is the one that can be maybe misapplied. It's just as a quick example.
So true. Well, let's do this. I want to make sure we have time for folks to ask questions as well. First, let's open it up to see if anybody's got any questions they want to ask. I've got some other questions that I'll definitely want to get to you as well, but let's pause from this side. Anybody that's tuning in want to kick things off with a question? Keep pausing for a second here and then.
What would you say your biggest hurdle was when you started Kaleido?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alex. It was interesting because I had worked in startups, actually paid my way through college, working with some startups, tech startups. And then, I worked in industry for a number of years, lived abroad in the US and here as well. And then went to get my MBA at UNC, which is my connection with Vicky. And then worked for about 10 years at IBM. So, I was always focusing on sort of skills acquisition and learning different functional areas. And my last 4 roles at IBM, was a P&L leader. Actually had a $3 billion portfolio in terms of P&L responsibility, and then launched a startup within a big company. So I really got a lot of like functional skills. I did think, and I led large teams. So the people part of it was a skill that I was growing as well. And I have an engineering background, but I even did a stint in sales just to learn more about what problems are customers bringing to us from a technology perspective, and what really is their consideration set, and how can we really help solve those problems? Because I was pretty curious about that. But I think in maybe the hardest part of like starting a company when you're not like an entrepreneur, you're actually starting your own company. It's just, the team you're going to live or die by your team. Every person counts. Really thinking about building the company in the different stages it's in, your different considerations for like a 12-person team when you're starting, or, even like a 5 to 12 to 25 to 50 to 150 and beyond. So I think just really focusing on a lot of what people call soft skills, but they're really the most important thing, I think, that determines success or failure. And a lot of times, all of us carry backpacks from our last job. So you have to think about baggage you might have. One thing we like doing on our team, and I started doing at IBM, was the Strengths Finder assessment, which is from the Gallup Foundation. And just really knowing your strengths, knowing complementary strengths across the team, knowing areas that you probably don't focus on as much and maybe are more blind spots. So how do you counteract that? And I think just really getting to know yourself as an individual contributor and leading from where you are, or, as a leader, a more official leader, and just being able to, understand how to position others for success, how to position, what you need to be successful, what would be a good role for you to be in. All of that learning, I'd say, is probably the most important thing to learn in general, but especially if you're in a startup situation, because you don't have like a huge organization around you that can maybe, pick up some of the balls, or, you could toss some balls to, the buck sort of stops with you. And then I think a lot of times as leaders, people might, and this happens with big companies, they think their version of success is what they want to hire for, the way they approach things. And you get a team that ends up not having the diversity of skills you need to really tackle problems, because you see the velocity of change in the world is, rapidly increasing. And if you have this groupthink and everyone has the same skill set, then you're missing a lot of the critical pieces to be able to be agile and adapt and really be innovative. So I guess a long-winded answer to say, focusing a lot on the people side of things and organizational behavior, I think, is really key to get right in the entrepreneurship space, but it's also pretty true in big companies as well.
Hey, Sophia, did you create the backpack analogy? Is that something that
I did. I just was laughing because when I was in IBM and I had these big teams cycling through, I could always see the job that they came from. People would bring a lot of ideas and the sort of focus and wiring. It took a while to sort of let go of the backpack and put it on the ground and just start really absorbing new skills. And maybe sometimes it can be great. Like you want experience working with channel partners and understanding different routes to market. That could be an important ingredient in their new job, but people have to be able to, grow into new areas of responsibility and new ways of thinking that are in front of them there too, to be successful.
So good. I feel as if there's either a book, a blog post, a playbook, something.
I mean, I'm sure someone else has said it before too.
So good.
That concept of you bring your own baggage, sort of, it's like a small bag, it's a backpack, but
That's right. But it feels it feels much more approachable if you view it as
yeah.
And also the blog.
For students alike. So we have backpacks.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. Vicky, let's turn it to you. You have a question, right?
Yeah, I did. So Sophia, you mentioned having diversity of thought in the company and how that was really important. You, as a woman technologist, you've grown up in technology and stuff like that. I was also a technology person, and oftentimes we're going to be the only woman in the room. And one of the premises behind Foundit is that we really want to open up technology related fields, industries, and solving problems so that everyone can see themselves in this industry. What advice do you have for people who may not be typical technologists, but are interested in any advice you would give them as they explore, new career opportunities or just explore in general?
What would you define as not a typical technologist?
So I would say if someone is like, oh, this blockchain stuff sounds interesting, but, I'm walking in a room and nobody looks like me, or I'm having conversations, or I'm at a table and I'm having a hard time finding my voice or getting people to listen to my voice. And so I would say people or people who are maybe on the business side who may not feel that they have that depth of knowledge to be respected by, traditional technologists, and may feel like they need to learn more before they can start to really explore, speak up, and ask questions. Did I answer your clarifying question?
Yeah. I think if I start with the second part, the people with more of a business background, I think what you really need is the interest in technology and the ability, to understand some of these complex terms. But, I think if someone studied humanities in college, some of that can get pretty complex from a terminology and level of abstraction. So, you have skills you could apply there. And what's missing a lot of time, you have people who are technologists, but they're not able to explain what they're doing in a way that's really scalable to the masses. So if you're interested in blockchain, Web3, digital assets, and you're able to be bilingual, where you understand the business implications, you understand some of the technology underpinnings, which enable this new way of working or the differentiation and value, then that's extremely valuable. So you could be in a marketing role, you could be in a product role where you're really working with engineers, but you're able to explain the so what, so you have that what's new and what's different, and but how does that enable a better future, and why does that matter, the big wow. So I think there's a lot of roles for that, for people who are great communicators and also good, open minds, good in interacting with people and just bringing people together and helping enable more understanding. So I think, if you have a business background, but you're interested in technology, that shouldn't stop you at all. And actually, I know some people from the early days, like one of the folks at Microsoft who did a lot with token taxonomy and their work in the token space, was from North Carolina and from App State, and had a non-technical undergraduate degree, but ended up leading a lot of their technical product work in the space. So and today, to this day, is still very active in the token space, token standard space. So I think in terms of the first part of the question, where you feel maybe there, in some, I guess the fear could be that there's a club, and if you don't look like that club, you can't get in. But to the inner circle or make an impact, I'd say, it's interesting, Web3 and blockchain, we're part of this venture studio for a couple of years, and then we spun out and we're an independent company now. But just going to a lot of conferences, traveling around the world, being part of these early ecosystems, it's a very inclusive community. They feel very strongly about giving people a voice. Even that venture studio isn't morphed more into a company itself. They wanted to follow a holacracy methodology approach, and just thinking of different ways that they could organically involve. So it's very led from the edges, when people in the company are making decisions and they're close to their customers and the market, what they're trying to do, and just empowering that. So I think there is this ethos of creating a new way of working together, as well as a new way to use technology to enable a new world. I'd say a lot of the early people, in the public blockchain space, some of them even they considered themselves anarchists to some sort, because they thought well, the whole world is, going to move to this brand new way of working. And of course, my perspective was we need to meet people where they are. And then we moved together to this new world in a way that makes sense, because ATM machines aren't going away overnight. You still need to like buy a plane ticket. There's these big, big ticketing systems that run on mainframes, they've been around for over 50 years. I mean, you just don't like snap a finger and then like everyone's just using digital currency and everything's digital. Like people need to get real food on their table and, support their families, feed their kids, etc. So, you have to bring people into the future. But I do think it's really is very more inclusive than other movements. And in general, in technology, I think that, I personally haven't run into issues. I think, some of that's a testament to the companies I worked for. Like IBM was a very strong proponent of diversity back, it's over 100-year company. And they were the first ones who had women working for them. And they had executive letters, like disabled people and different, racial diversity. Even before that, any of those are like mandates in the US or commonly adopted. So I think when you work with technologists, a lot of times people with more technology bent are pretty transparent and just say what's on their mind. And there's not a lot of high context communications going on. So it's pretty easy for me if I'm in a room and I'm the only woman, I just say what's on my mind, and everyone else is wired the same way. So it's pretty easy. But of course, there's a lot of microclimates in any company you're in, and it comes down to people. So one person who's wired differently could, cause problems. And we see that in companies across, all the sectors. So I'm not saying there's no problems at all, but in general, I find that working with engineers, things can be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that. Yeah, I agree that there's definitely a way of communicating that's very different in technology companies than in others. And people coming from a different environment may take things the wrong way. So it's almost like there needs to be like culture shifts for yourself, but also I think another key message. I love the fact that you said this, like blockchain and just that environment is more open, and just by nature of what it is, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I won't say there aren't pockets in any community that exemplify the wrong behaviors. And I think when there was the intersection of people who are like your typical finance and then Bitcoin, that, there are some communities within the broader Web3 that, there's some bad behavior there, which has been called out in the press. I personally never attended those events because I'm not, in these like crypto communities. I'm building enterprise technology solutions. So my experience would be probably pretty different than someone who's on the, in these speculative token communities, hanging out with like day traders, basically. Yeah. So.
That's well put. So let's do this. Yeah, that's well described for sure. Let's do this. So we got 3 minutes until we're going to be hitting the conclusion of this one. And so, Sophia, what will be fantastic is, how can folks stay in touch with you and Kaleido? What's a good way? Either can they follow you on Twitter? Do you have a newsletter? Are there other ways that you want folks to interact? What's a good way for us to keep up this momentum?
Yeah, if you go to kaleido.io, which is our webpage, you could sign up for a newsletter there. You could also sign up for a starter tier and just play with the technology yourself. And if you have any questions or run into any, sort of technical roadblocks, you can open a ticket there. So it's pretty easy. Support team could talk you through stuff. We have great, documentation as well on the website. We'd love for you to follow us on LinkedIn. So if you go to Kaleido LinkedIn, you could just follow us there, and then you'd get all the streams of updates about clients we're working with and new interesting thought leadership in the industry. So those are the two places that I would point you to.
And then what's a good next step for all of us? So I'm thinking broadly about either continuing this journey to learn about blockchain or continuing all of our innovation journey, so to speak. For instance, for me, I'm thinking the next step is, what's my backpack? What am I carrying with me? And how do I use that as an engine for good, but also for me to reflect on where I can grow? What's a recommendation for all of us as our next step on this innovation journey?
Yeah, I think everyone's in different places. So I think just knowing yourself and identifying, sort of where you are, where you'd like to get to, a couple areas for growth. I think could be a good next step, some goals. Certainly realizing there's a community of people and lots of resources out there, but you need to be able to imagine the future you're trying to work towards in order to make those possibilities start happening. So I guess that could be a first step. But for me, it's always sort of starting with yourself. And the more you know yourself and what you're trying to achieve, I think helps result in better outcomes.
I like the sound of that. That sounds like a good way for us to do it.
Yeah, you can unpack your backpack as part of that, but
That's right. Yeah. Not me for all the above.
yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Sophia, thank you so much for giving us so many gems, so much inspiration, and a really clear understanding of the value that you all are bringing to helping folks solve these hair on fire problems. That you've got us on the right course in a really big way. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Vicki. And it was great meeting you all. And certainly feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well.
That's fantastic. Vicki, let's turn it to you. Any final call outs and things? I of course, I know there's going to be an email going out to folks with more information about upcoming events, more information about how you can use some of our digital tools on this innovation journey. So that's forthcoming. Vicki, what else should people know?
So I would say that hits the highlight. So we just got through. This is our second initial event here. We're definitely going to have some more events in the spring. So when you get the follow-up email, if you're not already, sign up for our newsletter, and we're going to tell you more about that. But really think about this as a journey. And one of the places that you can come to really find out what you need in your backpack and where to go next on your journey is with these founded events. And Nick and Sophia, thank you both so much. This has really been wonderful. It has been great just getting a great foundation of blockchain and what we can do with it all. And Nick, your dog's super excited about the subject, which is great. And all of our audience is enjoying it. But I really appreciate y'all taking the time out of your busy schedules, both as founders of growing companies. So thanks again. So
yeah, really appreciate
with
it.
that, thanks everyone for being here. And we'll definitely follow up with an email. Look for it in your inbox tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing y'all at an event sometime soon. Bye, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Bye.